The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with the usual sounds of 1,000 different species trying to communicate. Translators worked overtime as delegates from across the galaxy gathered for another quarterly meeting. The massive circular chamber stretched up toward a glass dome that showed the stars. Beyond, Chancellor Vex of the Zephyrian Empire adjusted his flowing robes and looked around the chamber. Something felt different today, though he could not place what it was. The usual mix of scales, fur, feathers, and stranger things filled the seats. Representatives spoke in clicks, whistles, and growls that the translation machines turned into common speech. "Where are the humans?" asked Councillor Deck, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence. The small, insect-like being pointed one of her 6 arms toward an empty section of seats. Vex followed her gesture and noticed what had been bothering him. The entire human section sat empty. Not just a few missing delegates, but every single human seat was vacant. The blue and green banners of Earth hung limp and untouched. "Probably running late again," grunted Admiral Kresh from the Korthic hegemony. His massive frame shook the floor as he shifted in his specially built chair. "Humans are always showing up at the last minute with some crisis they think we need to handle." Several other delegates laughed at this. It was true that humans often brought urgent matters to the Council's attention. They seemed to worry about every small conflict, every trade dispute, every refugee crisis across the galaxy. Many council members found it tiresome that the session began without the humans. Vex called for the first order of business, expecting Ambassador Chung or one of the other human delegates to rush in with apologies. But the doors remained closed. The human communication channels stayed silent. "Perhaps we can actually get some real work done today," whispered Senator Korth of the Stellar Banking Consortium. His slug-like form rippled with what passed for amusement among his species. No more lectures about helping primitive worlds or wasting resources on refugee camps. As the hours passed, the council worked through their agenda with unusual speed. Without human delegates asking uncomfortable questions about ethics or demanding votes on humanitarian aid, business moved smoothly. Trade agreements were signed quickly. Military budgets were approved without debate about peaceful alternatives. Vex found himself enjoying the efficient pace, though something nagged at him. The humans usually sent messages if they were delayed. They were annoyingly punctual about such things. But his communication console showed nothing from Earth or any human colonies. Communication check with the human delegation. Vex ordered his aide during a break. The young Zephyrian tapped his tablet several times, then frowned. "Chancellor, all human communication channels are inactive. Their embassy doesn't respond to calls. Technical problems, most likely." Vex waved dismissively. "Continue with the session." 3 days passed. The quarterly session concluded with record efficiency. More bills were passed in these 3 days than in the previous 3 meetings combined. Council members congratulated themselves on their productivity. It was only after the session ended that anyone bothered to investigate the human absence seriously. Vex sent a formal inquiry to the human embassy on the council world. The response came back within an hour, but it was not what anyone expected. To the Galactic Council, the message read, "Effective immediately, humanity withdraws from all council activities and joint operations. We pursue independent development going forward. We wish you well in your future endeavors. This communication will be our last." The message was signed by Ambassador Chun, but it was clearly a formal statement rather than a personal note. No explanation was given. No demands were made. No anger was expressed. Independent development? Vex read the words aloud to his advisors. "What does that mean?" His military advisor, General Zorth, pulled up star charts on the main screen. "Sir, our monitors show human ships withdrawing from joint patrol zones across 17 sectors. They're leaving their posts quietly, with minimum communication. Leaving their posts? Vex's head tentacles twitched with confusion. Those are security assignments. They can't just abandon them. Apparently they can, Sorth replied. And they are. Human vessels are departing from shared bases, research stations, and peacekeeping missions throughout Council space. The news spread quickly through the capital. Other species representatives were confused, but not particularly concerned. Humans made up less than 3% of Council membership. Their departure would barely be noticed. Good riddance, Admiral Kresh announced at the officers' club that evening. Tired of their constant preaching about protecting every weak species in the galaxy. Now we can focus on real military priorities. Dr. Sara of the Galactic Medical Corps was less dismissive when she heard the news. But the humans run most of our emergency response protocols, she pointed out. They coordinate disaster relief across 12 sectors. We'll manage, her supervisor replied. How hard can it be? Similar conversations were happening across the capital. Human involvement in various operations was noted and quickly dismissed. They were junior partners in most ventures anyway. The senior species would handle things just fine without them. What nobody noticed was how quiet the human departure had been. No ships left in dramatic formation. No final speeches were broadcast. No ultimatums were delivered. Human personnel simply finished their shifts, filed proper transfer paperwork, and disappeared. The Galactic Council continued its normal operations. Trade flowed. Military patrols continued. Research projects moved forward. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. In fact, many council members commented on how much smoother things ran without human interference. No more time wasted on debates about helping primitive worlds. No more resources diverted to refugee assistance. No more humans asking difficult questions about the ethics of trade agreements with dictatorships. The humans had left as quietly as they had served. The galaxy barely noticed their absence. At first. 3 months after the humans disappeared, the first problems started showing up. They were small things at first, barely worth mentioning. A few ships attacked here and there. Some delays in supply shipments. Equipment breaking down more often than usual. Admiral Kresh was reviewing the weekly security reports when his aide brought him troubling news. Sir, we've had 16 pirate attacks in the Outer Rim this month. That's 4 times the normal rate. Kresh's massive head looked up from his datapad. Have our patrols been lazy? No, sir. Patrol schedules are normal, but the aide hesitated. The attacks are happening in areas that used to be completely safe. The Kepler-Vega trade route, the Centauri shipping lanes, the Aurora sector freight corridors. Those routes have been secure for years, Kresh growled. What changed? His aide pulled up the patrol records on the main screen. Green lines showed current patrol routes. Red dots marked where attacks had happened. Kresh studied the display with growing confusion. The attack sites were scattered across space that should have been well protected. Run a comparison, Kresh ordered. Show me patrol patterns from 6 months ago. The display shifted to show historical data. Suddenly, dozens of additional green lines appeared, filling gaps in coverage that Kresh had never noticed before. The red attack sites all fell in areas that had been covered by these missing patrols. What ships were running these extra patrols? Kresh asked, though he was starting to suspect the answer. Human vessels, sir. According to records, they were running voluntary security sweeps during their off-duty hours. Small cruisers and escort ships mostly, nothing fancy. Kresh stared at the display. He had never realized how much space the humans were covering. Their ships were old and simple compared to the advanced Korthak warships, so he had never paid attention to them. But they had been everywhere, quietly keeping trade routes safe. How many routes were they covering? His aide's voice was quiet. 67% of Outer Rim security, sir. They never filed formal reports or requested additional resources. We thought they were just training exercises. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other problems were starting to show up. The Velen Mining Consortium was facing its worst quarter in decades. Accidents in the asteroid belts were up 300%. Equipment failures were crippling operations across 12 systems. Chief Engineer Grix floated in his pressure suit outside Mining Station 7, looking at the wreckage of another processing unit. This was the 5th major breakdown in 2 weeks. The expensive machinery was supposed to run for years without problems. What's causing these failures? He asked his assistant over the COM system. Hard to say, Chief. The main systems all check out fine, but the safety protocols keep triggering shutdowns, and the backup systems aren't responding properly. Grix examined the damaged equipment more closely. The primary components were all Velen made, built to their exact specifications. But as he looked deeper, he noticed something strange. Tiny modifications had been made to almost every system. Little improvements that weren't in the original designs. Who authorized these modifications? His assistant checked the maintenance logs. Says here they were implemented by volunteer engineering teams. Looks like humans mostly. They've been upgrading our safety systems for the past 8 years. Grix felt a cold feeling in his stomach. The humans had been quietly improving Velen equipment without being asked. They had added backup systems, improved safety protocols, and fixed design flaws that Velen engineers had never noticed. And they had done it all for free during their off-duty time. Now that the humans were gone, the improvements were failing one by one. The Velen engineers didn't even understand what the modifications did, let alone how to fix them. On Kepler Station, Dr. Sarah was facing her own crisis. A plague had broken out in the station's lower levels. It was a simple bacterial infection, nothing that should have been difficult to handle. But somehow, everything that could go wrong was going wrong. Medical supplies were delayed. The quarantine protocols weren't working properly. Different departments couldn't coordinate their responses. What should have been a minor health issue was turning into a major disaster. Where's the emergency response team? Dr. Sarah demanded as she tried to organize treatment for hundreds of sick civilians. We don't have one, her assistant admitted. I mean, we have the equipment and the personnel, but no one knows the coordination protocols. What do you mean no one knows? The human medical officers used to handle all the emergency coordination, Doctor. They had these complex systems for organizing multi-species medical responses, but they never trained anyone else on the procedures. Dr. Sarah felt a growing sense of panic. She had assumed that emergency response was handled by some council department. She had never realized that humans were quietly running the entire operation. When disasters struck, human medical ships were always the first to arrive, but she had thought that was just good luck or superior technology. The truth was much simpler. Humans had been monitoring emergency channels across the galaxy, coordinating response efforts, and organizing relief operations. They did it without fanfare, without asking for credit, and apparently without anyone else even noticing that similar discoveries were being made across Council space. The Galactic communication network was starting to lag. Messages that used to be delivered in hours now took days. The translation systems were producing more errors. The data routing between incompatible alien computer systems was breaking down. Investigation revealed that humans had been serving as the backbone of interspecies communication. They had written translation software that bridged the gaps between different ways of thinking. They had maintained server farms that kept data flowing between species, whose technology was completely incompatible. The Stellar Banking Consortium discovered that their intersector financial transfers were failing at an alarming rate. The complex systems that allowed different species to trade with each other were breaking down. Currency exchanges that had worked smoothly for decades were now producing errors and delays. It turned out that humans had been quietly managing the most tedious parts of galactic finance. They translated not just languages, but entire concepts of value, trade, and ownership between species that thought about commerce in completely different ways. All across Council space, the same pattern was emerging. Humans have been handling the boring, unglamorous work that kept civilization running. They maintained systems that other species didn't even know existed. They solved problems that no one else wanted to deal with. And they had done it all quietly, without asking for recognition or additional resources. They have simply seen things that needed to be done and done them. Now they were gone, and the cracks were starting to show. The galactic civilization that had seemed so strong and efficient was beginning to reveal how much it depended on the species that everyone had taken for granted. 6 months after the humans left, the Galactic Council was facing its worst crisis in 1,000 years. What had started as small problems was now threatening to tear apart the very fabric of interstellar civilization. Chancellor Vex stood before the emergency assembly, his tentacles drooping with exhaustion. The great chamber that had once buzzed with confident voices was now filled with angry shouting and desperate demands for action. "The trade networks are collapsing," announced Senator Korth, his slug-like form quivering with panic. "Shipping delays have increased by 4,000%. Half of our major trade routes are completely blocked by system failures." "It's not just delays," added Councillor Deck. "Different species can't even communicate their trade requirements anymore." The humans were translating more than just words. They were translating entire ways of thinking about commerce. Vex had seen the reports. Human traders hadn't just learned alien languages. They had learned alien cultures so deeply that they could help species work together even when their basic concepts of value, ownership, and exchange were completely different. Without them, the galactic economy was falling apart. The Zephyrian Empire's own internal reports painted a grim picture. Supply chains that had run smoothly for decades were breaking down. Raw materials from mining worlds couldn't reach manufacturing planets because the complex logistics networks had depended on human coordination. "What about our scientific research?" asked Dr. Zenth of the Galactic Research Institute. "The great collaborative projects are all stalled. Our best minds can't work together anymore." This hit Vex particularly hard. The Council's scientific advancement had been one of its greatest achievements. Brilliant researchers from hundreds of species had worked together on projects that no single civilization could complete alone. But now those projects were grinding to a halt. The problem wasn't that alien scientists were less intelligent without humans. The problem was that they thought in completely different ways. Korthak researchers approached problems through military precision and hierarchical thinking. Zephyrian scientists valued elegance and artistic beauty in their solutions. Velen engineers focused on practical efficiency above all else. Humans had somehow been able to work with all of them. They translated not just between languages, but between entirely different approaches to understanding the universe. They helped a methodical Korthic physicist work with a creative Zephyrian mathematician and a practical Velen engineer. Without human scientists to bridge these gaps, the great collaborative efforts were falling apart. Each species was retreating into their own familiar ways of thinking, unable to benefit from the different perspectives that had made their joint research so powerful. But the worst news was yet to come. Several member species are talking about leaving the Council, reported Ambassador Yiltha the diplomatic. Course, her voice was barely above a whisper, as if saying the words too loudly would make them more real. "Which species?" Vex asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The Deltran Republic has already submitted formal notice. The Centauri Alliance is considering withdrawal. At least 30 smaller civilizations are questioning their membership." Vex felt his heart sink. These weren't tiny, irrelevant worlds. The Deltran Republic controlled some of the galaxy's most important industrial systems. The Centauri Alliance was a major agricultural producer. Without them, the Council would lose massive resources and population. Why are they leaving? Ambassador Yulf's three eyes avoided looking at Vex directly. They say the Council no longer represents their interests. Without human advocates, the smaller species feel abandoned. The larger powers are dominating decisions again, just like in the old days. The truth was becoming clear. Humans hadn't just participated in council meetings. They had served as advocates for species that couldn't protect themselves. When powerful civilizations tried to bully smaller ones, humans had spoken up. When trade agreements unfairly favored the strong over the weak, humans had demanded changes. They had done it so quietly and skillfully that most council members had never realized. It was happening. But the smaller species had noticed. They had counted on human protection from the political and economic dominance of their larger neighbors. Now, without that protection, they were being pushed around again. The Korthic hegemony was demanding military tribute from worlds that couldn't defend themselves. The Stellar Banking Consortium was imposing unfair interest rates on developing civilizations. The Zephyrian Empire was claiming resources and systems that belonged to smaller species. There's more, Ambassador Yulf continued reluctantly. We're also getting reports of actual conflicts. Border disputes that were settled peacefully for years are flaring up again. Admiral Kresh, who had been unusually quiet during the meeting, finally spoke up. I've been reviewing our peacekeeping records, he said in a voice that was much smaller than his usual confident growl. The humans had a 94% success rate in preventing conflicts from escalating to actual warfare. The chamber fell silent. 94% was an almost impossible achievement in galactic diplomacy. Wars had been a constant threat throughout the galaxy's history. Territorial disputes, resource conflicts, and cultural misunderstandings regularly led to fighting. How? Vex asked. Kresh pulled up data on the main display. They handled thousands of small disputes that never made it into the official records. Border disagreements, trade conflicts, cultural misunderstandings. They would show up before anyone else even knew there was a problem, and somehow work out solutions that satisfied everyone. The display showed incident after incident where human diplomats had quietly prevented conflicts from starting. They hadn't used military force or economic pressure. They had simply talked to people, understood different perspectives, and found compromises that worked. They were doing this without orders from the council? Vex asked. Without anyone even knowing about it, Kresh confirmed. They kept the reports in their own files, marked as routine diplomatic contacts. I only found them because I was trying to figure out why we're suddenly getting so many crisis calls. The full scope of what the humans had been doing was becoming clear. They had been working as the galaxy's maintenance crew, quietly fixing problems before they became disasters. They had prevented wars, managed trade disputes, coordinated disaster relief, maintained communication systems, and handled the endless small tasks that kept civilization running, and they had done it all while the rest of the galaxy barely noticed they existed. Now the cracks that had started small were becoming massive fractures. The galactic economy was collapsing. Scientific progress had stopped. Political alliances were falling apart. Conflicts were breaking out across multiple sectors. The Great Galactic Council, which had seemed so powerful and permanent, was coming apart at the seams. All because the species that everyone had taken for granted had quietly walked away. Vex looked around the chamber at the panicking representatives and realized with growing horror that they might not be able to fix this. The humans hadn't just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been the glue holding it all together. The emergency order came from the highest levels of the Galactic Council. Find the humans. Bring them back. Do whatever it takes. Captain Thorn of the Council Search Fleet received his orders with mixed feelings. He had always respected the human crews he had worked with, but like most Council officers, he had never thought they were particularly important. Now he was being told that the survival of galactic civilization might depend on finding them. Any idea where they went? Asked his first officer, Commander Zilk. Thorn studied the star charts on his ship's main screen. Human colonies were scattered across 17 sectors, but long-range scans showed most of them were empty or running with minimal populations. They've definitely moved somewhere. The question is where. The search began immediately. 50 ships spread out across the galaxy, following every possible lead. They checked abandoned human outposts, questioned traders who had dealt with humans, and monitored communication frequencies for any sign of human activity. What they found was completely unexpected. "Captain," reported Lieutenant Voss from her monitoring station, "I'm picking up human ship signatures in the outer rim, but they're not where they should be." Explain. According to our maps, this area is empty space. No major planets, no trade routes, no strategic resources. But I'm reading dozens of human vessels and what looks like construction activity. Thorn ordered his ship to investigate. When they arrived at the coordinates, they found something that made no sense according to everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. A massive space station hung in the darkness between stars. It was clearly human-built, but it was larger than anything humans had ever constructed before. Dozens of ships moved around it in organized patterns, and energy readings showed the station was fully operational. How did they build this so fast? Commander Zilk asked. They've only been gone 8 months. Maybe they were building it before they left, Thorn suggested. But even as he said it, he knew it didn't make sense. The Council monitored all major construction projects. Something this big should have been impossible to hide. As they moved closer, more surprises awaited. The ships around the station weren't all human. Thorn could identify at least 6 different species working alongside human crews. Some of the ship designs were completely unknown. "Sir," called the communications officer. "We're being hailed." A human face appeared on the main screen. She was middle-aged, with the kind of calm confidence that Thorn associated with experienced space officers. But there was something different about her expression, something he couldn't quite identify. "Council vessel, this is Admiral Sarah Cross. You're approaching human Commonwealth territory. Please state your business." Thorn was confused by almost everything about this contact. First, he had never heard of Sarah Cross, holding the rank of Admiral. She had been a mid-level liaison officer when the humans left the Council. Second, what was the human Commonwealth? And third, why was she treating them like foreigners? "Admiral Cross, this is Captain Thorn of the Council Search Fleet. We're looking for human leadership to discuss the current crisis affecting Council space." Cross's expression didn't change. "What crisis would that be, Captain?" Thorn began explaining the problems that had developed since humanity's departure. The economic collapse, the breakdown of communication networks, the failed peacekeeping efforts, the scientific research that had ground to a halt. As he talked, he noticed that Cross was not surprised by any of it. "I see," she said when he finished. "And you want us to come back and fix these problems." "The Council is prepared to offer significant concessions," Thorn said. "Better representation, increased funding for human projects, formal recognition of your contributions." Cross was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and measured. "Captain, would you like to see what we've been doing since we left?" Before Thorn could answer, his ship's sensors lit up with new contacts. Dozens of ships were approaching from multiple directions. But these weren't military vessels coming to threaten them. They were clearly civilian ships of various designs, and they were broadcasting messages of greeting and welcome. "Those are refugee transports," Cross explained. "The Kithrian people lost their homeworld to environmental collapse 6 months ago. The Council declared them a low priority for assistance. We've been helping them establish new colonies." Thorn's heart sank. He remembered the Kithrian situation. The Council had indeed classified them as low priority because they had no strategic resources and limited technology to offer. The decision had been made based on cold economic calculations. Behind you, you'll see construction ships working on habitat modules for the Zelen refugees. Their world was strip-mined by consortium corporations, but the Council ruled that they had signed legal contracts and weren't entitled to compensation. "We're building them new homes." More ships became visible as Cross continued her explanation. Engineering vessels were working on massive construction projects. Medical ships were tending to populations that looked sick and malnourished. Transport ships were moving supplies to what appeared to be newly built colonies. The Vorthan species was denied Council membership because their technology level wasn't considered sufficient. The Rishan people were classified as not ready for galactic contact because they didn't have unified planetary government. The Nephis were turned away because they couldn't pay the membership fees. Cross paused and looked directly at Thorn. "All of them are here now. All of them are part of the Commonwealth. We're not just helping them survive, Captain. We're helping them thrive." Thorn activated his ship's long-range scanners and began to grasp the true scope of what he was seeing. This wasn't just one space station. There were dozens of installations scattered across multiple systems. Entire civilizations were being rebuilt with human assistance. But how? Commander Zilk asked in wonder. The resources required for something like this. "When you're not spending most of your time cleaning up other people's messes," Cross replied, "you have a lot of energy available for constructive projects. When you're working with people who actually want to cooperate, instead of just looking for someone to blame when things go wrong, you can accomplish amazing things." The implications hit Thorn like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just left the Council. They had taken their incredible organizational abilities, their talent for cooperation, and their drive to help others, and they had applied all of it to building something new. "How many species are part of your Commonwealth?" he asked. "Currently 47, Cross answered, with more requesting membership every month. Turns out there are a lot of civilizations out there who are more interested in working together than in fighting over who gets to be in charge." As if to prove her point, Thorn's communication board lit up with signals. Ship after ship was broadcasting greetings in dozens of languages. His translation computers were working overtime to keep up with the variety of species trying to welcome the Council vessel Dot, but the most shocking discovery was still to come. As Thorn's scanners analyzed the Commonwealth territory, they detected something impossible. Several of the ships and installations were using technology that was clearly Council-made, but far more advanced than anything in current Council space. "Admiral Cross," Thorn said slowly, "some of this technology appears to be beyond current Council capabilities." Cross smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Captain, what do you think happens when you take the human engineers who were maintaining your equipment and the alien scientists who were working on your research projects, and you let them actually collaborate instead of just trying to work around bureaucratic restrictions?" The answer was obvious, and it terrified Thorn. The humans hadn't just left the Council. They had taken with them many of the best minds from other species. The ones who had been frustrated by Council politics and eager to work on projects that actually mattered. The human Commonwealth wasn't just a collection of refugees and rejected species. It was becoming a technological and economic powerhouse that was advancing faster than the Council had ever managed, and it was growing every day. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in their history. Half the member species had already withdrawn, their seats empty and their banners removed. The remaining powers sat in a chamber that felt too large and too quiet. Chancellor Vex's tentacles trembled as he read the final reports. The galactic economy had collapsed completely. Scientific research had stopped. Wars were breaking out in 12 sectors. The great civilization they had built was falling apart. "We have no choice," growled Admiral Kresh, his massive frame hunched with defeat. "We must force them to return." The word force hung in the air like a threat. For 1,000 years, the Council had avoided large-scale military action between member species. But these were desperate times. The Commonwealth is growing stronger every day, reported Intelligence Chief Nix. They're not just taking in refugees anymore. Some of our remaining member species are requesting to join them. If this continues, the Council will cease to exist. Senator Korth's slug-like form rippled with anger. They have a responsibility to the galaxy. They can't just abandon their duties and build their own civilization. But even as he spoke, everyone in the chamber knew the truth. The humans had never had duties to the galaxy. They had simply chosen to help, and the Council had taken that help for granted. Now they were choosing to help someone else. "We'll give them an ultimatum," Vex decided. "Return to the Council and resume their previous roles, or face the consequences." The message was sent through diplomatic channels. The response came back within hours. Admiral Sarah Cross appeared on the main screen, but this time she wasn't alone. Behind her stood representatives of dozens of species that Thorne didn't recognize. Some had been former council members, but others were completely new to galactic politics. "Chancellor Vex," Cross said politely, "I understand you have concerns about our activities." "This is not a negotiation," Vex replied, trying to sound authoritative. "The galaxy needs stability. The Council requires human participation to function properly. You will return to your previous roles immediately." Cross tilted her head slightly. "And if we refuse? Then the Council will take whatever action is necessary to restore order." There was a long silence. Cross looked at the representatives behind her, and Thorne could see them nodding in agreement about something. When she turned back to face the screen, her expression was calm but firm. "Chancellor, may I ask you a question? If we were so important to the Council's operations, why did no one notice what we were doing until after we were gone?" Vex's tentacles twitched with irritation. "That's not the point. The point is that you have responsibilities." "To whom?" Cross interrupted. "To the Council that classified us as junior partners? To the species that called our work routine maintenance? To the civilizations that took credit for our achievements?" She gestured to the representatives behind her. "Or do we have responsibilities to the 47 species that asked for our help? To the refugees that the Council abandoned? To the scientists who were tired of being held back by political games?" Admiral Kresh leaned forward, his voice a threatening rumble. "You're forcing us to consider military action." Cross's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Admiral, can I remind you of something? For the past 10 years, human engineering teams have been maintaining and upgrading equipment across the entire Council fleet. Did you think we only made improvements to alien technology?" The implications hit the Council members immediately. Every major Council warship had been serviced by human engineers at some point. If the humans had been making improvements to alien equipment, what had they been doing to Council military hardware? "You're threatening us?" Kresh growled. "Not at all," Cross replied. "I'm simply pointing out that if we were maintaining your equipment while you thought we were just doing paperwork, you might want to ask yourself what else we were capable of." As if to prove her point, alerts began sounding throughout the Council chamber. The building's environmental systems were experiencing minor glitches. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make everyone nervous. "That's just a demonstration," Cross said calmly. "Every major council facility has human-designed components. Every major computer network includes human programming. Every critical system depends on modifications that only we fully understand." The message was clear without being stated directly. The humans weren't threatening to attack the council. They were pointing out that the council's entire infrastructure was dependent on systems that humans had built and maintained. "What do you want?" Vex asked, his voice much smaller than before. "We want to be left alone to build something better," Cross answered. "We want to work with species that value cooperation over domination. We want to help civilizations that actually want to be helped, instead of being taken for granted." She paused and looked directly at each council member in turn. "But mostly, we want you to understand that the galaxy is bigger than the Galactic Council. There are hundreds of species out there who were never allowed to join your organization. There are thousands of worlds that could contribute to galactic civilization if they were given the chance." Over the following weeks, the final collapse of the old council accelerated. Species after species withdrew, choosing to join the growing commonwealth or establish their own independent alliances. The great powers that remained found themselves increasingly isolated. Some tried to maintain their old ways, ruling their territories through military force and economic pressure. But without the humans to maintain their infrastructure and coordinate their operations, even these efforts began to fail. Others made different choices. 6 months later, Vex found himself standing in a very different chamber. The new assembly hall was built in human Commonwealth space, but it looked nothing like the old council building. Instead of a hierarchical arrangement with the most powerful species in the center, the seating was arranged in interconnected circles. No single species dominated the layout. "Nervous?" asked Admiral Cross, who now served as one of the Commonwealth's rotating coordinators. "Terrified," Vex admitted. "The Zephyrian Empire has never been just one voice among many." "That's not what this is about," Cross explained patiently. "This isn't about making every species equal. It's about making every species useful. Your people are brilliant artists and philosophers. We need that. The Korthik are incredible military strategists when they're not trying to conquer everyone. We need that too." She gestured toward the assembly hall, where representatives from over 100 species were working together on various projects. Everyone contributes what they're best at. Everyone benefits from what others contribute. No one gets to be in charge of everyone else. As Vex watched, he could see what Cross meant. A Korthek military planner was working with a Zephyrian artist to design defensive structures that were both functional and beautiful. Velan engineers were collaborating with human scientists and Deltran philosophers to solve complex technical problems. It wasn't chaos. It was coordination on a level that the old council had never achieved. Instead of every species jealously guarding their advantages, they were sharing knowledge and working together toward common goals. "How do you make decisions?" Vex asked. Carefully, Cross smiled. "And with lots of discussion. We don't vote on things until everyone understands the problem and agrees on the goals. It takes longer than the old council way, but the solutions actually work." Over the following years, the transformation continued. The old council territories became a mixture of independent systems, small alliances, and regions that petitioned to join the Commonwealth. Some of the old powers adapted to the new way of doing things. Others retreated into isolation, unable to accept that their time of dominance had ended. The galaxy was no longer ruled by a single organization. Instead, it became a network of cooperating civilizations, each contributing their unique strengths to the common good. Trade flourished as species that had never been allowed. Council membership brought new resources and ideas to the galactic economy. Science advanced rapidly as researchers from hundreds of worlds worked together without political interference. Wars didn't disappear completely, but they became much less common. When conflicts did arise, there were always experienced negotiators ready to help find solutions that worked for everyone involved. Many of these negotiators were human, but not all. The techniques that humans had used to prevent conflicts could be learned by other species. The humans had departed silently, leaving the council to face the pain of their own failures. But in the end, that pain had led to something much better than what had come before. A galaxy where cooperation was valued over domination, where every species had something valuable to contribute, and where the quiet work of maintenance and care was finally given the respect it deserved. And if the humans took quiet satisfaction in seeing their former bosses learning to work as equals with species they had once dismissed, well, they were much too polite to mention it.